I was a huge fan of Conan when I was growing up. I grew up reading the Marvel series.
My own relationship to Conan came through the Savage Sword of Conan. It was very violent and very, very sexy and very cool.
Frazetta, man, because you see those paintings and you want to read those books.
There was an amazing movie that was done in the 1980s. We were huge fans of that movie.
I said to the producers, I said, your biggest problem in this production is that you're going to work with people who actually very, very much care about Conan.
I'm a fan. Every key department was fans. So it's basically fans making a movie.
My father and I used to go to these old bookstores, and they had just stacks and stacks of old comic books and old paperbacks, and actually some of the old pulp, magazines from the 30s. I remember looking through the stacks of these old pulp magazines. The first thing that struck me were these covers. And I remember paging through, reading these Conan stories by Robert E. Howard. It was like I would turn the pages and the pages would crumble, because they were so old. But that made them seem almost like, these sacred scrolls that I had stumbled upon.
Pulp magazines were a phenomenon that were extremely popular in the Depression, the 1930s. In fact, that's probably their zenith of popularity. But they were essentially mass market fiction. And the one that Howard is best known for contributing for was Weird Tales. There were essentially 17 Conan stories that were created by Robert E. Howard within a very short 4-year period. The first one in 1932, the last one in 1936. The Conan character, most famously, Howard said, sprang into his mind full-blown one day, just out of nowhere, and started telling him adventures. Howard just suddenly had this idea of this lean, pantherish, quick-witted, and very courageous barbarian. As J.R.R. Tolkien invented Middle-earth, this fabulously detailed tapestry of interlocking kingdoms and mythical countries, Robert E. Howard came up with his own backstory, the Hyborian Age. And Hyboria was also a collection of prehistorical countries. The Hyborian Age is kind of the cornerstone on which all of the fictional world of the Conan tales are based.
The initial concept was to go back to Howard. So you want to tell about the man, where he came from, what's his world, where does he live, what kind of a person he is.
Robert E. Howard wrote all of these great stories, but none of them felt like, in and of themselves, they could be this movie. And so we decided that, okay, so Conan is many different things in these stories. He is a thief, he's a mercenary, he's a pirate, he's a king. I mean, all of these different things are different facets, different stages in the life cycle of Conan. We wanted to give a little hint, just a little taste of each one of these. So in the movie, you get to see Conan the thief a little bit. You get to see Conan the mercenary a lot. You get to see Conan the pirate as well. And we figured that would be a great introduction to the character, the cloth in which you can create a franchise.
When Robert E. Howard died in 1936, this was towards the end of the pulp fiction. And when the war started, there was a paper shortage. So the pulps couldn't continue. There was no paper. So the stories that Howard wrote, they were forgotten until in the mid-50s, a young editor who was sprayed to camp reached out, and he was working for Gnome Press and got the rights to relaunch these stories. They weren't huge successes.
But then 7 years later, 1966, Lancer Paperbacks comes out with Conan the Adventurer, with this amazing Frank Frazetta painting of Conan standing on a heap, a literal mountain of dead bodies with a half-naked slave girl at his feet. Wow, believe me, that caught the attention of a 16-year-old.
I think Frazetta did an amazing job at bringing fans to Robert E. Howard, because you see those paintings and you want to read those books.
He brought alive just that world of fire and ice.
What is most important when forging a blade? Fire or ice?
Fire. Ice.
The script, what I thought it succeeded in was that they found all these iconic moments that you see in every Frazetta. They all have been defined by Frazetta.
We knew that we are looking, first of all, for somebody who has a great eye for visuals.
We found that Marcus Nispel has got the best eyes, the best vision in making movie.
Let's get on the long lenses, get a bit more swishy. Boom, boom, right?
And that's what Marcus is very good. He see the character, he see the beauty of the movie.
His previous two horror movies, which was Friday the 13th and, of course, the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, were stylistically brilliant movies.
And cut. Excellent.
And he made a presentation, and he had these cue cards that he really just read through of scene after scene. It was a stunning presentation.
For Conan, you want to give people a real experience, put you back to when you still got dirt under your fingernails because we're playing in the mud, building little forts and tree houses and so on. In the script, Conan was sparring with a wizard, with a magician. That's a big problem for me from a logical point of view, because if Khalazim is such a great magician, why doesn't he just turn Conan into a rabbit? And if he can't, why can't Conan just take his head off?
The director, Marcus, early on decided this was going to be what some people call low fantasy, in the sense that there's going to be magic, but it's not going to be like Harry Potter, because he wanted things to feel a little bit more concrete.
We wanted to make sure that the magic in the world of Conan matched what Robert E. Howard envisioned for it. And in almost all of those, magic was a very primal, a very elemental force. It was blood magic. Magic had a price to it. It had a cost.
And I think now that everybody can do breathtaking special effects on their computer back home, I think it goes back to a more visceral, real experience.
I had really fallen under the spell of liking Robert E. Howard's writing, and I said that perhaps having Conan in a Marvel comic book might expose Conan to a new audience that was not buying the paperback books, and we would be able to plug Conan and make him perhaps even more popular.
Roy Thomas is really the steward of Conan throughout the 70s and the late 60s with the Marvel imprint.
The Barry Smith Conan was tall, very intelligent. He fits the description very well of the Howard materials. People love the interpretation. In fact, I do believe, though, that John Buscema's interpretation, probably on a commercial level, was even better.
John Buscema was a wonderful draftsman and storyteller, one of the best in the history of comics. And he began to do the more muscular and a little more mature Conan, and he could make these worlds really come alive. The most beautiful women in the world, the most powerful heroes, the strongest monster. Conan, at one stage, was probably making about as much money for the company of Marvel as Spider-Man or the Fantastic Four.
In the 70s, the comic books took it to a different level. Comic books really influenced that generation, and it was just starting to become a pop culture phenomenon.
So that by the late 70s, we added the Savage Sword of Conan, which was in black and white. Since they did not go through the Comics Code Authority with its rules of, no sex, being very careful about the levels of violence, the language, and so forth, was just a much freer type of thing.
It was very violent and very, very sexy and very cool.
There could have been an instinct to go PG-13 in order to get more of a four-quadrant movie. But that was never the intent. The intent was always to do this as a hard R movie.
I was really impressed because they didn't try to make it nicer and cleaner and turn it into something PG-13. They went all out. It should be rated R. It is rated R. There are lots of blood and guts. I think they did a really good job of making it a very adult film.
Before Ed Pressman got the option to make a Conan movie, he was watching Pumping Iron.
A documentary, actually, which starred Arnold Schwarzenegger. When the lights came up, Ed Pressman said, "That guy has a lot of charisma, that Arnold Schwarzenegger." He almost stood out as the star of the film, even though he wasn't. And he said, "I'd like to find a property we could use him for."
What can we do? And this other person says, well, he's Conan. And Ed says, what's a Conan? I saw the film, the Milius film, Conan the Barbarian, which didn't really strike me as Conan at the time, but I loved the film. I thought it was a fantastic movie. I mean, obviously, Arnold on screen was a walking special effect. And that was, in itself, ecstatic. But it wasn't really Conan.
The Conan of the stories is kind of a noble savage with a lot of wit. With the Schwarzenegger movie, he's essentially like a mass of muscle.
But the movie became a cult hit right away. And after the film, it was a totally different ballgame. Conan became a worldwide known fantasy icon.
When they asked me to cast it, we went to great lengths. I actually called John Milius and I said, "John, if you would have to do it again, who would you hire?" And he says, "I'd probably go to the Iraq, and find somebody there, somebody who really scares the shit out of the Americans." So we went to Iraq, we went to Russia, we went to anywhere Eastern Europe.
We had bodybuilders from everywhere and huge guys but nobody was this guy.
And Jason had read for the role, but he looked weird. He had a big beard and he had dreadlocks and deep voice, couldn't really hear what he was saying.
You lie. You are the very reason my people are dead.
And then Marcus kept pointing at, you have to look at Jason Momoa.
I said, that's how he sounds in real life. It sounds like he's talking in a bucket. That's how Conan's supposed to sound like, but that's him.
You are my word. You tell me where I can find Kalar Singh, and I will not kill you.
Marcus was persistent. He did a second audition tape with him. He took him up to Mulholland Drive one night and put some barbarian clothes on him and gave him a sword.
I brought my own wardrobe there and I wanted to, how I wanted him to look. And then he had the whole thing set up and cameras and fans and fog and the whole 9 yards.
We put sort of plants in the foreground to make this home look a little bit more Hyborian. Then he essentially did a little bit of posing, and then I said, show me some swords play. And he took the sword and just went nuts.
He's like, kill the plant, kill the fucking plant. And I'm like, all right, fine. I'm stabbing the shit out of this thing.
Take him down, stab the plants. And he kept on stabbing and stabbing, and then he pulled something up and was the whole flower pot on his sword. And I showed it the next day, and I said, guys, here's your Conan.
When I saw that tape, I said to my people, he is Conan. One of the challenges was that we really wanted to have an unknown actor who didn't have that baggage of going up against Arnold in his breakout role. The 1982 Milius film, Conan the Barbarian, was a big success. And of course, that meant that the merchandising people, the licensing people, wanted to, get on the Conan bandwagon and do a series of animated cartoons. They did Conan the Adventurer, and then subsequently Conan and the Young Warriors. And it's quite interesting to watch them, because now, 20 years later, we watch them, it's like, yes, it's Mr. Conan's Friendly Neighborhood. And then along comes Ralph Muller. And Ralph wanted to play Conan. Ralph chased down the rights holders and said, I really want to do this television series.
Fight Club! Now is the time!
Ralph's actually pretty good in it. He's doing a lot of good stuff. They tried to do a good thing, but I think they just failed from a storytelling perspective. And Ralph, I don't know, there's something about his Conan that just doesn't, I think it's his hair that doesn't work for me. The 90s saw Conan all over the map. He just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. There is a cover. That's the jewel of the crown of the big steroid ox Conans. And I think that it added to the fall of Conan from his mighty throne. We basically said we have to go back to his core values. The first call was to Mike Richardson of Dark Horse Comics, and he said, I want to establish this character so he becomes believable and not just somebody who in every issue battles a bad magician or a bad snake. 20 or 30 artists all wanted to draw Conan. I remember we got the samples to our office, and I saw immediately one guy's pages just jumped at me, and that was Cary Nord's stuff. It was stunning. It was just so fresh. He was lean, but muscular, and he was young. And I thought that it really looked like, here's the guy. If you look at the Dark Horse comic book, that is Jason Momoa. We went to a company called Funcom, a Norwegian MMO developer, video games, and they worked on this game for 5 years.
Down the years, there were various games on different platforms to kind of insert the Conan setting. It wasn't really until Paradox acquired the license that people started kind of treating Conan as a real gaming license. And it was kind of, how do we take that further? How do we really establish the world for Conan and take it forward into the future? The art director, Didrik Tollefsen, he went back and built up a huge, what we called an art bible, literally collecting all the material so that when the artists started to work on the game, they could start to see how these worlds would come together.
The Age of Conan game had been so effective in producing what I would say, a Bible. What in essence we could do is basically take whole chunks of Cimmerian villages and just say, here's a whole Cimmerian village designed, and put that to work and refine it so it works for the movie.
There's been this love affair I've had with this fictional barbarian for most of my life. And it's just amazing that even as Conan doesn't change, we do. And yet I still can find depth, and I can still find attraction and meaning in the various iterations of this character. He just seems to be a really durable pop culture icon.
The legacy of Conan is one that has spanned, decades now. It's the single character who could be a part of all these different art forms and still remain this one idea. But who's to say 100 years from now he won't be bigger than ever?
I think this film is a starting point for a new era of Conan.
Each fight has had its own distinct personality.
They're all kind of very physical and very difficult.
Definitely makes the day feel unique when all you do at work is throw punches and strangle people with chains.
Getting a crash course in samurai training is just fucking cool. I mean, it's just fantastic.
The idea always, to me, is to do it 90% real, and then really you just make a few implementations. And that was really the mantra for Conan in general.
Marcus and I both agreed that it should have a very gritty kind of feel to it, that it would feel like real people in an ancient time.
You want a battle to really look a real battle, but on the other hand, you don't want just the guy to get rid of his enemy in 2 seconds. It's something that a good stunt coordinator, choreographer work together and make it.
Having had dealt with Jason Momoa prior to filming, we landed on a gold mine with him. He has all the talent in the world.
The sword style is definitely a hybrid. There's elements of Japanese martial arts, Filipino martial arts, traditional broadsword work. It's a mixture of all of it. It's just the Conan style.
I spent about 6 hours a day training with 8711, and he trained me and broke me and made me into who I am as far as Conan's concerned. I mean, it's just heavy lifting and a lot of reps. You do like 1,000 reps and then, in the course of an hour. So you're sweating and vomiting and lifting, and like you wouldn't voluntarily put yourself through that much pain. But the samurai training and like the sword training was just great.
Jason put a lot of work into it, and it really shows. He wanted the gracefulness of the swords play and how he learned and trained and wanted to be sort of agile and quick and cat-like.
The truth be told, I mean, Conan speaks through his actions, you know. I spent so much time developing his movement and his style that I just wanted to add a little bit of elegance and movement and style to the broadsword.
Jason's a prodigy in sword fighting. He was picking it up so fast that we would create elaborate sequences and change them on the day, and it was no problem for him.
I can't tell you how many blades we've broken against each other. And, you know, he can be heavy on that blade, but I'm sure I can be heavy with it, too.
I think that our job as stunt coordinators is to, like, get the character in the scene as much as possible.
David Leitch is an extremely talented stunt coordinator, and he literally worked on these pre-visualizations that went on and on, where every move was sort of choreographed.
When we do video viz, I usually use the stunt doubles to shoot that stuff. To get the idea, we'll shoot it and cut it, and then we'll present it as this is what we think it will be. These will be like visual storyboards or like virtual storyboards. And then we'll start to train the actors in those specific movements that they're going to have to do. I had pitched Marcus that these Sand Warriors are kind of like free runners or parkour creatures, and they can travel through different levels.
The concept behind them is these elusive characters that use the earth as their protection. They have the ability to literally dissolve into the sand, cruise underground, pop up where you least expect them, making it hard for a barbarian-type guy who likes to face off mano-a-mano.
They're definitely creepy. They've got contacts in. They look like little evil devils.
We did an incredible amount of practical wire work with the Sand Warriors flying on that set piece. Jason did a lot of the wire gags. He did a lot of the free jumps, grabbing, climbing. It's all him.
That scene jarred me up the most because I did all my stunts where you see me like hucking myself, and there's nowhere to hide pads. Like, you're getting scraped up and beat up, so.
You don't have a stuntman who looks like Jason and can do all that sword stuff like Jason can. Non-stop, they would say, have Jason do it.
That's a bit of a joke, sorry. Here you go.
With the carriage, you know, this scene was written in the last moment, and we thought that it would be nicer if Conan will meet Tamara while a chase is going on, you know.
I kept on hearing that some of the best horsemen came from Bulgaria. I said, let's do a great horse scene. And I really haven't seen a great horse chase ever since Stagecoach. So we then designed a very, very involved scene. It's a bitch working with horses, even if you have the best horsemen in the world.
Today I'm driving the carriage, actually, and I rode with Jason on the back of his horse. And now we're about to do a jump. And I'm tired.
On a sequence like that, you usually use multiple cameras, but we were really guerrilla style. I mean, we were handheld on the carriage with a guy with some bungee. You know, the Steadicam ended up doing like 3/4 of the work because it was our only sort of stabilized head. So it was pretty old school.
And basically, there is almost every trick that you know in a chase is in this scene.
I'm a big fan of horses, so I was really acting my ass off there. It's very scary.
Jason riding the horse did an amazing job, but Rachel, she actually drove the carriage, the 2-up carriage.
And aside from one stunt, I did all the rest of the riding myself, which I was really happy with.
In the climactic scene where Tamara is strapped to the wheel, they went to a real cave.
Apparently, the Nazis stored their gasoline there during the war, and a Messerschmitt flew through the cave, full wingspan. That's big. Let's make that our end scene, and let's save ourselves the set.
You know, from the stunt perspective, it's not safe. We got, you know, rocks that could come down from this. We would have to put up safety nets. You know, for 15 minutes, we were trying to convince him, can we do this here? Just, no, I want to be in the cave. And it was just, the deal was done. We had to go to the cave.
By crom, it's cold in here.
I basically, for the next 3 days, am strapped to a wheel in an either vertical or reclining position.
Unspeakable are your name.
We had this very, very complex scenario where Rachel is tied to a wheel and slowly collapsing down that crevice.
We had to figure out how to safety and maneuver actual bodies on top of that falling altar and make it feel real and that gravity was really working. So it was quite an elaborate process.
My thanks go out to the stunt team and to the actors that figured out this choreography of a wheel with a woman strapped on it that keeps on turning and falling. Really stripping in the background was the easy part in many ways.
We felt with the first fights that they were pretty good fights. And so that puts the real onus on you to make the last fight, which really needs to be the mother, you know, to make that every bit as slam bang as you can.
It's always fun when you get to do a fight sequence, and it's a tough fight sequence. It's not, you know, some hair-pulling thing.
That's my biggest fight scene. That was really sort of the nitty-gritty, throwing punches, whipping her around, throwing her against a wall. I mean, that stuff's cool.
It's been great fun to spar with Rachel and to try to kill her.
Chick fights are awesome.
I live, I love, I slay, and I am content.
The end result is beautiful.
The stuff they've created, you know, production design, what they've done with everything here is truly impressive.
To me, to take all of that and replace it with digital effects is not, I think, the experience you want when you see a Conan movie.
There's something that happens when you're in a real place. It looks different. There are things that are unexpected about it.
It's a great world and a great person to play. I think we did it right, so let's make some more.
last night? Huh?
The image of Conan today is this half-naked guy wearing a furry loincloth. And I can't think of a single Robert E. Howard story where that is the case. The Conan in Robert E. Howard stories is deliberate, he's intelligent.
Conan was obviously a fantasy projection of Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard was a bright guy, obviously, who it seems to me lived almost totally in his imagination. He was just trapped in this small town in Texas with a bunch of people who didn't understand him and he didn't understand them, and he would just let out his fantasy life into these stories.
Robert E. Howard was born in a fading little cow town called Peaster, Texas, just west of Fort Worth in 1906. His father, Isaac Howard, was what they called back then a country doctor and almost an itinerant physician who toured the local countryside to tend to the sick and to the ailing, including places like Cross Plains, Texas, where Robert eventually, in 1919, when he was 13 years old, settled.
He grew up with these two very literate parents. Books were in the house.
And he was always reading everything from the saga of Billy the Kid, which you would expect, but books on Poe, Plutarch, and Plato, which you wouldn't expect. So Howard was unusual in that sense.
There's a woman from Burkett, a nearby town. She wrote a little piece called Robert E. Howard as a Boy. And in it, she sees Robert coming across the field with his dog Patches. And Robert says to her, "I'm going to be your writer. Don't you want to read what I write?" Robert E. Howard wanted to be an adventure writer, first and foremost. He would talk to the old-timers and hear stories about the Civil War and the taming of the frontier in Texas.
In fact, sometimes he'd see an old person sitting on a porch of a ramshackle hut or something like that. Stop, get out, introduce himself, and then just sit on the porch and listen to this person just spin tall tales about his life or experiences. Robert, I think, particularly at that period of time, would act out sometimes the adventure aspects of the stories that he wrote with his friends, where they would actually have like papier-mâché or wooden cutlasses and they'd bang each other up with fake swords, or be actually cavemen with loincloths. Robert E. Howard loved boxing. That was one of his great passions. And Robert wrote a lot of boxing stories.
He might be wielding a gun instead of a sword, but if you took those stories and revamped them a little bit, Howard wrote the same hero over and over. Pulp magazines were a phenomenon that began around the turn of the century, and they were called pulp magazines because they were on a very rough wood pulp type of paper.
A pulp was essentially working-class, blue-collar literature, and in a bigger sense, the precursor to television. People read back then, and they read for entertainment.
There were all sorts of pulps, no matter what you liked: science fiction, horror, detectives.
Around 1925-ish, this new magazine comes out called Weird Tales.
Weird Tales, the unique magazine. And it was unique. It was one of the first publications to zero in on horror, fantasy, and the supernatural.
The first thing that struck me were these covers, these lurid covers. Women bound to slabs about to be sacrificed, and these muscle men battling these strange winged creatures. It was bizarre. I mean, it was something completely new.
Howard wanted to write swashbuckling stories, but he couldn't sell that kind of thing to a magazine called Weird Tales. He had to find a new way.
When he first started to write, Robert E. Howard was interested in Nordic and Celtic cultures, and he was fascinated by Irish folklore.
He certainly heard some tales of voodoo from the ex-slaves when he was in Bagwell. He talks about Aunt Mary Bohannon. She was an ex-slave, and she told him stories that he said were, the most scary stories he'd ever heard.
So Howard was steeped in all of this kind of tradition, and he just naturally put it into his stories and then amped it up a bit.
So he had his swashbuckling hero fighting monsters and witches and wizards.
He adds this supernatural element to make a sale to this new pulp magazine, Weird Tales, and this is where he created the sword and sorcery genre. From there, he creates several characters.
People like Solomon Kane, who is this pilgrim who travels to places like Africa to fight supernatural evil.
And even a character called Kull. He was from a primitive island called Atlantis and rose to rule a civilized land.
When he first created the character Conan, he took an unsold Kull story and put a supernatural element into it and changed the character Conan. The story was The Phoenix on the Sword. He must have sensed that he had something going here. He wrote a couple of other Conan stories real quickly after that, The Frost Giant's Daughter and The God in the Bowl. Farnsworth Wright didn't like two of them, but he bought The Phoenix on the Sword if Howard would tweak it a little bit.
He did nothing but write full-time. He would put ass to seat for 18 to 24 hours a day sometimes and just keep writing.
Suddenly, Conan became one of the most popular things in the magazine.
The character appeared in many issues of Weird Tales in a very short period of time.
So he was kind of a superstar of the pulps, Robert E. Howard, during his own lifetime. Robert was also in charge of his mother's health. Hester herself actually contracted a long, serious bout of tuberculosis. And if Dr. Howard would have to go treat somebody, he might have to go away for 2 or 3 days. So Robert was essentially Hester's nurse. Everything from bringing her meals to changing her nightgown to making sure she had the medication. So these two are housebound. They're always at home. And on top of that, Robert is sitting writing furiously. He stood out like a sore thumb. It just marked him as an outsider.
The main theme in the Conan stories was that of an outsider. He was a Cimmerian from a fictional place called Cimmeria, which was up in the hilly north somewhere. Then he came south to make his fame and his fortune among the more civilized kingdoms. And he was always the outsider.
He lives in a barbaric world where he can sort of act on his natural impulses at any particular time. I think we're attracted to him because we live in a society now where we have to keep a certain side of ourselves completely hidden. We have to behave in civilized ways. If you see an attractive woman, you can't just you know, throw her over your shoulder and carry her off.
Novelyn Price was a local school teacher who became interested in Robert E. Howard when she heard that there was actually a professional writer living in Cross Plains, because she had serious aspirations to become a professional writer herself. She wanted to do serious fiction. And one time she asked him flat out, she goes, well, what do your readers want? And he said, what they want is action. He says, I don't stop. He says, I don't analyze. I don't philosophize. Act, feel, act.
When Howard started dating Novelyn, she's been pestering him to, you know, dress up a little bit. You know, why are you wearing your pants so high up, and why don't you, you know, look a little nicer? So this is where he gets his nice suit on and his fedora and has his picture snapped, and he presents Novelyn with the picture. If Novelyn Price shows up in any Howard story, I would say it's Valeria in Red Nails. And the character, Valeria, is strong-willed. She's not your typical Conan fodder, if you will. She's got a brain. She's almost his equal.
Although he was a successful selling writer, his main markets, and particularly Weird Tales, weren't paying. This was the Depression. He was desperately writing letters to Weird Tales magazine saying, can you pay me this $2,000 or $3,000 you owe him?
He was, I think, done with the Conan stories. However, he was locked into the pulp format. He was known as the writer of Conan and all these other kind of stories, and he wanted to get out of that.
Robert and Novelyn both apparently had thoughts of marriage, and then they have some kind of a fight, and she ends up dating another of Howard's friends, Truett Vinson, who lived in Brownwood. And when that news comes out, that's pretty much the end of the Novelyn-Bob romantic relationship.
The last year or so of Robert E. Howard's life was not a good time for him. And then I think the tipping point was that his mother was increasingly frail, and she had slipped into a coma. Not long after, a nurse came in and told Robert that his mother was finally actually going to die within a very short period of time. He walked out and sat in the car and opened the glove compartment and took out a borrowed revolver and killed himself at the age of 30. Not long after, Cross Plains had its first double funeral.
I wish that he could have seen some of his own legacy, because it would have made him feel a great deal of satisfaction to know that these stories are still read, and even more widely read now than they even were in the 30s.
When Howard died, people wanted someone else to carry on the Conan character. Farnsworth Wright decided that probably wasn't the best thing. No one could write Conan the way Howard did.
Drums of glory are lost in the ages. Bare feet fail on a broken trail. Let my name fade from the printed pages. Dreams and visions are growing pale. Twilight gathers and none can save me. Well and well, for I would not stay. What of the world that I leave forever? Phantom forms in a fading sight carry me out on the ebon river into the night.